Hey guys, I'm Saurav, and in this video I'm going to teach you how to edit the images in Lightroom. Now the images which we take with our camera might have less contrast, the colors might not be saturated, and it might not look exactly as it would when you were watching the scene. So the basic idea of editing and post-processing is to make it look as natural and as real, but with good colors and good contrast. So this video can be a bit longer, but I would recommend you to watch the whole video, because if you watch the whole video, I can ensure that you will understand each and everything that you need to know as a beginner in Lightroom. So please watch the whole video, and I hope you will enjoy the video. Without wasting any time, let's get into it. Now I'm going to edit this particular raw file. The very first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go in the develop module where you can edit the images, and basically I'm going to watch the histogram so that I can understand how do I want my image to look and what kind of adjustments do I have to do. The very first thing I can see that is I don't have details on this part of the image of the histogram, but I have a pretty well spread histogram. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to kind of increase the exposure a bit, so that as you can see, as I'm increasing the exposure, the histogram gets more spread out and I'm going to get better details. So once I increase my exposure, the histogram looks well and I'm good to go. The very first thing that I'm going to adjust here is, after of course exposure, is the highlights. The highlights are basically the brightest part in your image. This particular part in the histogram is the highlights. So when the highlights are too bright, you just cannot see anything. So the basic idea is to reduce the highlights so that you can see a bit of detail. So you can reduce it all the way to -100, but that doesn't look natural. So I'm going to do about about -50, -51 is good. Speaking about the shadows, as we decrease the highlights to see the details in the highlights, we kind of have to increase the shadows to see the details in shadows. As you can see here, the shadows are a bit darker, and I'm just going to increase the shadows a bit so that I can see much more details in shadows. So yeah, +14 and +15 is great. Now again, you can increase it up to +100, but that just doesn't look natural. So I'm happy with about 15 to 20. So once I'm done increasing my highlights and shadows, I'm going to adjust my whites and blacks. Now once you change the highlights and shadows, what you're doing is you are decreasing the contrast of your image. Basically, if you're decreasing the whites and if you're decreasing the blacks, you're making the image less contrast. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to adjust my whites and blacks and compensate for the loss of contrast. So I have turned this 2 markers on that is going to show me if I have any details lost in my image. This is particularly for highlights and this is particularly for my shadows. So this blue thing that you can see is basically dark shadows. So when I'm going to increase my whites, if I do it too much, as you can see the part in the red, basically that means that particular part is completely blown out and I have no detail whatsoever. So while increasing whites, what I have to remember is I of course have to kind of increase the contrast, but I do not want any loss in the details. So I'm going to increase my whites and I'm going to hold Alt simultaneously till the point where I see something blue or white in my image. So just beyond that I'm going to stop at, yeah, +30 looks great. So now what I did with increasing the whites is I increase the contrast in the brighter part, but I maintain the details in the highlights. I'm going to do the same thing with the shadows. Since here, with the blacks, since here you can see there are a lot of blacks, and I'm just going to leave it at 0. This particular part was already black, so it doesn't mean if we extract the details from a black portion of the image. So I'm going to leave it at 0, but again you can adjust that if you feel the contrast in shadows is a bit less. Next, proceeding to clarity. Now clarity is basically going to give you that grungy HDR effect, which is just going to make your image look unnatural. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to decrease my clarity a bit up to approximately -10, so that my image looks more natural. When you adjust the highlights and shadows, you're already kind of introducing a bit of HDR effect. So I'm going to kind of decrease the clarity, and that will kind of give me a better natural looking image. Speaking about vibrance and saturation, basically the intensity of color, if you want to increase the intensity of the color, you play with vibrance and saturation. Saturation is kind of a harsh slider, and I feel saturation doesn't yield natural results, so I'm going to play with vibrance. Again, I personally recommend you to increase vibrance and not saturation, because increasing vibrance will give you good colors, but at the same time it will also give you natural results. Now, if you're crazy, you will increase this up to plus 100, but as you can see, that doesn't look natural. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to slightly increase my vibrance, about maybe 20-25, and that will give me good colors, but will keep the natural look and feel of the image. I'm not going to increase saturation, as I said. Now, coming to the tone curve, that is the second panel of our Lightroom editing. Tone curve is a curve which I'm going to use to introduce contrast. You saw that in the basic panel, I didn't use the contrast panel because I feel the contrast bar in the basic panel is just too very harsh, and it doesn't give you much flexibility. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use a tone curve. Let me explain you what tone curve is. Tone curve is basically, of course, a curve which will allow you to adjust your whites and blacks and overall the look of the image. So this particular part you are seeing are the lights and highlights, and this particular parts are the darks and shadows. So for increasing contrast, you're going to increase your lights and you're going to decrease your darks, and basically you will get a good contrast image. When you're increasing the contrast, here you can decide how much amount of contrast do you want in highlights, how much contrast you want in shadows, and according to that you can adjust. Don't be too crazy with the curves, because again that will kind of give you clipped details and the details will be lost. So we are just going to gently pull this up till we see that we get a good contrast, but at the same time the details are kind of intact. So I'm happy with the highlights here. I'm going to just decrease my dark a bit, not much, so that I have details in the shadows, but again the contrast is maintained. So as you can see, this is a slightly S curve, and that is most probably what 90% of the times you're going to do, and this tone curve is going to give you much more flexibility in increasing the contrast, and is slightly a better option than simply adjusting the contrast bar in the basic panel. So we are done with basic and tone curve. Now let's see the third panel, that is the HSL panel, that is the hue, saturation and luminance panel. The first setting that we are going to adjust is hue. Hue is basically like how pure the color is. Like for example, here I think this portion of the sky was a bit more blue, contained more blue. So I'm going to take the color picker option, and I'm just going to point at this and slightly going to increase my blues. So about like plus 20 or something. And what that is going to do is kind of help me with the colors. So I'm going to make the blue a bit more richer. I'm not going to play with saturation because again, as I said, I feel the saturation bar is like, it gives you a unnatural look, and I don't want that in my image. So most probably I'm done with my hues. I don't want to adjust any other color. The next thing I'm going to show you is luminance. Luminance is basically the brightness, and luminance here will allow you to adjust the brightness of a particular color. And this is a very strong tool because you can pick any color and adjust the luminance without affecting the luminosity of other colors. So the very first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to kind of decrease the luminosity of the sky to get much more dramatic sky. And if you're not sure about like what color the sky is, then what you can do is, like here it is blue of course, but if you're not sure about it, what you can do is, of course, you can again click on the color picker. You can go and select the part which you want to decrease the luminance, and you can click and drag till you're happy. Now again, you can go like crazy, but I don't want that particular look in my image. I of course want it to look natural, so I'm just happy with minus 30. And the other colors might get adjusted, because if it is a mixture of colors, as you can see here, purple also gets a bit affected because the sky also not only has blue but also some kind of purple in it. So I would recommend don't play with colors. If you're sure about it, then go ahead for it. Otherwise, use the color pick option. That is much more flexible and easy option to go for. So we are done basically with the HSL panel. Now the next panel is split toning. I'm not going to show you in this video because I don't think this particular panel is needed for editing this kind of image. The next panel is very important, and the name is detail, and exactly as the name goes, this panel will help you to bring out details in your image. So let's get started with the detail panel. Now in the details panel, you have two settings to adjust: sharpening and noise reduction overall. and this will help you to extract details and to maintain the noise in your image. Now, to determine how much amount of sharpening you need, you have to see the ISO value, because if the ISO is more, you cannot sharpen the image a lot because that will introduce a lot of noise in your image. Now, I shot this particular image at ISO 100, and I know that if I shot this at ISO 100, I would be having less noise and I can sharpen my image pretty well. So I'm going to set my sharpening about 85 to 90. Let's go with 90 first. And this is a very important button. If you click here, and then you can pick the focus point where you want to see, and basically this I think will be a kind of give you a better idea. So here, as you can see, as I increased my sharpness to 90, of course it is very obvious that my sharpness of the image increases, but the other thing here that I have to adjust is luminance. Now, luminance is basically going to decrease the noise in your image. Now, if you increase the luminance a lot, it is going to make your image softer. So what you have to do here is to determine how much amount of luminosity do you require. I kind of use the technique that Serge Remily uses. What he does is kind of subtract this value, that is 90, from 100, and the value which we get is what he applies to luminance. So 100 minus 90 is 10. So what he does is he sets the luminance to 10. Now, this is not a hard and fast rule, this is not a rule which is written in any book, but this kind of works for him, and I have seen this pretty much gives good results to me as well. So I would recommend you to do the same. So now I want only this foreground to be sharp, and I don't want the clouds to be sharp overall the sky, because that will only add noise to the image, and overall nothing is getting sharpened. So I'm going to remove sharpening from that particular part, and I'm only going to keep it at this particular part. So I'm going to mask, I'm going to erase the portion out. It's very easy to do so. So what I'm going to use here is I'm going to use masking. So masking is basically, if I hold down Alt and if I click on masking, you can see everything is totally white. What that means is everything is getting sharpened. The portion which is in white is basically going to get sharpened, and as I slide the masking bar, you can see the portion gets black and some portion stays white. So basically the portion which is getting black are not going to get sharpened. So here I'm just going to select about 20, because that is eliminating most of the sky but keeping my foreground intact. So select a masking option where the subject that you want to sharpen is sharpened pretty well, but the clouds or the portion which you don't want to get sharpened are left out or are black basically. So that is all about details, and as you can see, with just you spend what, couple of minutes to 5 minutes in details, and you have got lot more details in your images. If you can't see, I might zoom much more for you. Oh, sorry. So you can see here, if we just turn it on and off, we are getting much more details, and that is the overall idea behind adjusting the settings in detail panel. The next thing is lens correction. Now, lens correction is basically adjusting the distortion or correcting the aberrations or artifacts that your lens produces. So here in the lens correction panel, I'm going to enable my profile corrections and enable remove chromatic aberration. So what that will do is Lightroom is smart enough to know which lens I use. So what that will do is basically correct the distortion that is produced by the lens up to a certain extent, and also remove any chromatic aberration, and it does a pretty good job in doing so. So you can see just with a single click you can correct the distortion pretty well. You can again fine tune it if you want, and I'm going to do so because I particularly think this image is a bit distorted. Most of the times the inbuilt auto distortion correction will work fine, but sometimes you have to fine tune it if you think the Lightroom is not able to do a better job. So I'm just going to kind of adjust the horizontal, because I think horizontally the image is a bit distorted, and now you can see the image is not distorted as before and the image looks natural. Okay, the distortion which was produced by the wide angle lens is now corrected. So I'm done with the distortion, but now as you can see, because I corrected the distortion, there are some white parts and I'm going to crop them out. So the crop tool is basically at the top, and I'm going to crop it right now. That's why I didn't show you the crop setting before, because I wanted to show you the distortion and then how do we crop it. So I'm going to crop the image. up to a certain extent, and I want to maintain a kind of symmetry, so I'm just going to make this temple or the whatever subject at the center, and I'm going to keep it about there, and I think this is a good crop for the image. So now what I'm doing is I have cropped my image, I have corrected the distortion. Now almost we are done 90% editing our image. The only certain final retouches that I'm going to teach you. So here in the effects panel, what we are going to do is we are going to slightly introduce vignetting. Now basically what is vignetting is, as you can see, as I slide my vignetting slider, it's going to darken the shadows. So if you slide it to the left, it will darken. If you slide it to the right, it will make it bright. So what is the basic idea is to just make the corners a bit darker so you can focus in the middle part of the image, and my subject is in the middle part. So what I'm doing is I'm just making my corners dark so that my eyes are drawn into that particular subject. So as you can see, it's not a big change, but yes, it draws the attention to the subject. So after adjusting the vignetting, I think I'm mostly done with editing the image. But I would do certain adjustments. Again, I feel the sky lacks a bit of drama. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use a graduated filter. So graduated filter is basically the fourth option from the left at the top. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to pull a graduation filter like this. Now basically what graduation filter is going to do is going to affect the particular part, but in a gradual manner. It won't be a very harsh filter, because if you make it more gradual, it will be less harsh. If you make it less gradual, it will be more harsh. So I'm going to hold down my shift and I'm going to pull it down from right here till here. What will shift allow me to is to pull a straight graduated filter so that I don't have to rotate and adjust it. And then I'm going to increase my clarity. So as you can see, as I increase and decrease my clarity, only certain part of the image gets affected, and that is basically the part which is selected by the graduated filter. So if you select on show selected mask overlay, it will show you in red what portion of the image have you selected. Now I only want that particular clarity to be increased in the clouds, and I don't want it to be affecting my subject. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select the brush tool. The previous versions of Lightroom do not have this, but the newer versions have. So make sure you have updated the Lightroom version. And I'm going to select auto mask. What will that allow me to is it won't bleed into the sky if I'm erasing from the fort, and it is a bit slower depending on your machine. So make sure you select the auto mask. Basically, even if it is slow, it will help you to do a better selection. So if let me click this so you can see it in a better way. If I paint like this, it will basically add to the selection, but if I hold Alt, you can see the positive sign changes to negative. So now what I'm doing is wherever I paint, that particular part will be erased from the graduated filter. So take your time. I'm just going to do a very rough work here because of course we don't have so much time to, but you get a brief idea, right? Like exactly what we have to do. So take your time and paint this as better as you can do, and that will basically kind of increase the clarity. Now let me show you the before and after what we got with the graduated filters. So as you can see, we got much more dramatic sky now, and I'm going to do a different setting as well. I'm going to introduce a new thing to you, which is a radial filter. Radial filter is basically a filter which is going to affect again a certain part of the image, but this time it's going to be a much more circular selection. So as you can see, this part of the image I want to be affected. I want this particular part to be a slightly brighter. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to increase my exposure. So as you can see, if I increase my exposure, this part doesn't get affected, but this part does. So I want to invert my mask. So I click on invert mask. Now this part only gets affected. I want it to be a gradual transition and not a harsh transition, so I'm going to increase my feather. And don't worry, I'm not going to increase the exposure that much. You will be thinking I am crazy, but I know that I did just to show you. So I'm going to increase my exposure just a bit. And I think I'm happy with that. So now with the graduated filter and the radial filter, what I did is I targeted only a certain portion of the image. Sometimes it might happen that you do not want certain effect to be visible in some part of the image. Suppose you want clarity to be only visible in the clouds, so do that. Suppose you want the exposure only to be in a certain part, you can use radial filter. So experiment with the graduated filters and radial filter. It might seem a bit confusing at the start, but I'm pretty sure, you know, after weeks of practice you will be quite comfortable with it. So most probably we are done. Here is the before and after. So you can see it's a vast difference. Here in the before, we do not have much details in the shadows and highlights, but after post-processing, after spending 15 or 20 minutes with the raw file, we are able to extract much more details and get better image. So I hope you guys enjoyed the tutorial and you understood what Lightroom is. In future, I'm going to make more such tutorials, of course, about Lightroom, Photoshop, and post-processing in general. So stay tuned to my channel for further more videos. I will talk to you guys in the next one. Bye.